Hello and welcome to CISO Leadership, Building Your Personal Action Plan. My name is Frank Kim. I'm a fellow at the SANS Institute. I also have my own security consulting and CISO advisory practice under the ThinkSec umbrella. And as I was getting ready for this session, I found myself reflecting back on my first day as a CISO in a new organization. And I remember thinking to myself, well, what now? And as a security leader, it's easy to get distracted, mired in the details, the everyday emergencies that seemingly never end. I've experienced this far too many times, and I've seen it even more before. For example, one of my clients who I helped with their strategic roadmap had a hard time making progress because they remained overwhelmed with the urgent but not important items. So to be successful and effective in your role, you need to take a step back and focus on the bigger ideas. This means building a practical personal action plan. So, what are the important items? If you're advancing in your career, it's important to hear what has and what hasn't worked for other leaders. Even experienced CISOs often need a reminder of how to turn common sense techniques into common practice. I find myself forgetting this all the time. I need to remind myself, hey, how do I turn that common sense into common practice? And as cybersecurity continues to mature, it's even more important that you, as a modern security leader and CISO, learn to lead transformation for your team, your organization, and ultimately yourself. Today, we're going to talk about some tools and techniques that are shown here to help you overcome these challenges, building your team, transforming your program, and getting you ready to advance in your career. So let's go ahead and take these three items one at a time. First, in terms of transforming your team, you're only as successful as your team. So let's talk about some of the ways that you can help them be successful. First, we have what we call this CISO mind map. And I want to do a quick shout out to Rafiq Rahman, who has for years been publishing a CISO mind map on his website that you can see available here. Now, this is our version, the SANS Institute version of the CISO mind map that we used, that we based on Rafiq's mind map with permission. And we went around and we asked a bunch of CISOs, security leaders, others in the industry, and said, hey, what is it that not only you as a security leader, but what do you as a modern security leader and CISO actually do every single day? And we're not going to go over all of the details here in this mind map today, but just by glancing at this, you can see in this diagram in the upper left-hand corner, we've got security operations. What are the things that you as a security manager and leader do to prevent, detect, respond to various issues that arise? Well, that is certainly still a huge and important part of what we do in our security programs. But you can see that there is a whole spectrum of other domains that we now have to be knowledgeable about so that we can drive leadership in these various areas. And if you look down towards the right-hand corner of this slide, you can see not only do we have security culture, but we have various leadership skills and competencies that you, the modern security leader, need to be knowledgeable about to be able to turn these things from common sense into common practice. And some of the items here in the lower right-hand corner are the things that we're going to be focusing on today in this session. Now, as you are listening to this at any time, if you have any questions, feel free to go ahead and type them into the chat window and we will respond. I'll respond as we progress in this session. So with that as a little bit of backdrop in terms of what is it that security teams, security programs need to actually get done, well, what about from a security leadership perspective? Here, we've got what we call our security leadership matrix. And you can see that this is divided into three primary columns. Now, I will say that you've probably seen versions of this chart, this matrix, in various places online. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that this chart is 50% better than the other charts that you've seen online. And well, there's a couple of reasons for this. Is one, a good friend of mine, Janie Bonnell, she really came up with this version of the chart. And it is, I think, 50% better because the ones you see online only have two columns. They only have the manager and the leader column. Whereas this one, of course, has the boss column as you see here. And, if you only have the two columns, there's maybe perhaps a little bit of a implication that, hey, somehow management is lesser than leadership. I definitely don't think so. You've got to have both management and leadership skills. But what you want to temper are some of those boss characteristics that you see in this first major column here. And we've probably all worked for that person, that micromanager that looks at every single detail, and you finish some work that they asked for and they were very prescriptive about what exactly they wanted, and you bring that work back to them and the boss invariably says, well, yeah, Frank, that wasn't what I was looking for. I actually want you to do this, this, and this. And eventually, over time, that boss, that micromanager, starts to just do the work themselves. And this is, of course, very demoralizing, right? Because the boss really tries to drive people, tries to command, tries to do all of the work for themselves in terms of controlling, dictating how things should actually be done. What, from a leadership perspective, right? What does the manager do? Well, the manager, right? Well, focuses on not just dictating, but telling, establishing the environment, managing work, trying to get roadblocks out of the way. And leaders, on the other hand, go a little bit further and say, okay, well, what do we need to do to influence, to sell, to create a shared vision that everybody could buy into? And depending on the situation, certainly, you're going to have to exhibit some of these different skills in some of these different columns. And so that's what we want to touch on today in terms of how you can actually go about doing this. Now, this brings us to a really great book by Patrick Lencioni called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And this book is really a leadership fable. If you haven't read it before, highly recommend that you check this out. Now, this book, really fun read, really quick read, because it is written in story form, that leadership fable. Now, there are 5 different slices to this pyramid here in terms of things that Patrick Lencioni says really create dysfunctions within a team. And let's go ahead and start at the top of the pyramid here. First, we've got inattention to results. When people tend to be a little bit selfish and focus on their own personal successes over team successes. I'm sure you've seen this before. But we also have avoidance of accountability. When people, they aren't held accountable for their lack of production or inattention to results or their counterproductive behavior. Unfortunately, I've seen this, right? That one person on the team that no matter what just doesn't seem to perform or doesn't seem to want to perform. And right below that, the middle slice, we've got lack of commitment, where people say that they're actually bought in, but they might perhaps engage in some passive aggressive behavior that makes it hard for work to progress, makes things a little bit more ambiguous. I've seen this firsthand when you've got engineers, security engineers, that new product is brought in, and they don't, for some reason, like this product. They preferred another product that they actually wanted to use. So they might act passively to delay the project, or at worst, sabotage it in terms of this lack of commitment. But you also have fear of conflict. Now you see that we're getting down towards the base of the pyramid here, right? Some of these foundational issues that are really the seeds of why teams can't perform well. And fear of conflict is really this inability to address issues and provide constructive feedback because, well, people are scared of the backlash they might receive. For example, one of my team members explicitly says that, hey, he finds it extremely difficult to have any type of challenging conversation. And because he finds it extremely difficult, he will, yes, avoid those challenging conversations. Well, if you avoid all challenging conversations, well, the team can never grow. You can never grow as an individual. Finally, notice what is at the base of the pyramid. And this is trust, right? The foundation for, well, really everything we do, not only at work, but in our personal lives here as well. Because when people can't be vulnerable with others on the team, you can't create, therefore, more meaningful relationships. So let's talk a little bit more about trust because it is so important. And that brings us to the circle of trust. What are some of the different characteristics, right, that you want to exhibit, that you things that you want to do to try to build trust with your team members? And let's go ahead and start in the upper right-hand corner at the roughly 1 o'clock position here with integrity, right? And that is simply saying what you're going to do and actually doing it. Now, right below that, we've got empathy, right? Really, truly being able to put yourself into the other person's shoes. Contribution, Sometimes you need to roll up your sleeves, get your hands dirty, actually get some of the work done as well. Consistency in terms of showing up every single day with the same approach, the same values, so that people actually know what to expect. Now, transparency. Now, this one is really important in my mind, sharing as much information as possible. As I reflect back on my career, there are some leaders that I worked with, and one of their most prevalent traits was transparency, right? They tried to share as much information as possible. Well, why? So that then I would be knowledgeable about what is going on, the different motivations of different people, different organizations within the company. And then I would be able to analyze and therefore make my own decisions going forward as well. But look at the top here, at the 12 o'clock position, we've got honesty, being truthful. And as I already said, for my colleague, that's extremely hard for him to do. So what is a tool that we can use to try to have a little bit more direct conversations? Well, this brings us to Radical Candor by Kim Scott. Now, this is a book that she has written, and the advice that she gives in this book, highly recommend that you check this out if you haven't seen this already. And she breaks this up into a 4-quadrant grid. Now, I think perhaps many of you know by experience that, hey, everything great from a leadership and management perspective comes in the form of a 4-quadrant 2x2 grid. But in all seriousness, this is a really great model here where she has divided up into 2 axes. The x-axis going left to right is how you communicate. Do you stay quiet? Do you stay silent on the left? All the way to challenging directly on the right-hand side. And on the y-axis, top to bottom, bottom to top, you've got, well, hey, caring personally about somebody, about the situation, all the way down at the bottom here to, well, maybe not caring at all. And she says, hey, the ideal place to be, of course, as we know from most of these 2x2 grids, is the upper right-hand corner, which she describes as radical candor. Now, if you stay quiet and you don't care about people in the lower left-hand corner, that leads to a situation of what she describes as manipulative insincerity, right? You say things, but you're not really sincere because you don't care and you tend to want to stay quiet. However, if you do care, but you are generally more on the quiet side, this leads to what she refers to as ruinous empathy. Too much empathy without, right, being able to be candid, well, that is not such a great situation either. And of course, if you are just very driven by outcomes, by results, right, you might challenge directly, but people might take that as obnoxious. So it's a little bit of a balance here in terms of this concept of quote unquote radical candor, something that elements of this you probably want to try to incorporate into your work as well. So in terms of providing feedback, well, what can you actually do? Here, we've got a couple little tools here so that when you are having some of these challenging conversations, when you are preparing for some of these challenging conversations, you want to think back. How do you go about providing feedback? Well, you start with the facts. You remember, start with the facts. This is very important. Don't start with emotions. Don't start with how it made you feel. Start with the facts. Hey, you were late to 5 team meetings by 10 minutes each, right? And then you talk about the impact. How did this impact other members on the team and the work that was being done? Then you pause, you listen for feedback. And depending how the conversation goes, eventually you will move into a phase of setting expectations. Now, remember, it's not just about providing feedback. It's also about receiving feedback and listening. So on the right-hand side, the sister, right, to this model here is, well, you've got to start by being approachable, listening, clarifying, asking clarifying questions, but notice that in the lower right-hand corner, that respond is the very last thing that you're supposed to do. And a lot of times, especially in the heat of the moment, right? Remember, common sense to common practice, right? We jump straight to responding. I've done this numerous times. I make this mistake even, I would venture to say every day, even with my kids. So we want to try to remind ourselves of this model. Start with the facts and respond last. Listen, right? To make sure that you are providing your team with the right feedback that they actually need. So now, with some tools in your tool belt to try to get your team into a better place, you also have to ensure that your security program is sustainable. I've seen security teams disintegrate after a few key people leave. And to combat this, you need to provide a vision, a mission for your security program that is going to endure beyond specific individuals. So, how do you go about doing this? Well, you need to keep in mind something that Douglas McGregor said. Most teams aren't teams at all, but merely collections of individual relationships with the boss. That sounds familiar. I've seen that before. Each individual vying with the others for power, prestige, and position. So it is our job as the security leader, as a security manager, to try to change this dynamic. Don't make it just about your team members' relationships with you. Now, this gets us to the security vision. How can you start to think about your security vision and try to expand it a little bit? So another little tool here that is from Jim Collins' book, Good to Great, is what he describes as the BHAG, the big, hairy, audacious goal. And this is an intersection, as you can see here on the right-hand side, of three different things. What are you deeply passionate about? Right? Maybe it's cybersecurity. What drives your economic engine? And what can you be the best in the world at? This intersection of this diagram here is your BHAG right in the middle. Now, you can't choose to just make this up, right? It has to be something that you can be the best in the world at, that does drive your organization's economic engine, and that you are deeply passionate about. So as you are thinking about this vision overall, right? Once you've got that vision in place, you want to make sure that your team is reminded of that vision on a regular basis. Now, from a strategy perspective, in terms of providing value to your team, to your organization, well, what do we do every single day from a security perspective? And a lot of what we do and our technical team members do are the things at the very bottom of this slide: learning and growth. We tend to try to do things, implement tools and processes and products to create and maintain the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of our systems. Now, I'm going to stretch a little bit here and say, you know what? Most of the rest of the organization doesn't care about that, right? Well, at least directly. What do they care about? Well, they care about the things that they can see, that they, the customer, can see. In some organizations, regulatory institutions, you might be driven by improving compliance. But especially in for-profit and other mission-driven organizations, they are trying to improve customer satisfaction, build the brand. And it's not just about making money, even in for-profit organizations. Certainly, increasing profit, lowering costs, and increasing revenue to drive that increased profit are key elements of what the organization is trying to do every day. But we need to keep in mind how our work in terms of building out confidentiality, integrity, and availability, that CIA triad, leads to increased efficiency, business innovation, improved reliability, and how those actions and activities map up to the higher level items that the organization cares about, and ultimately helps our organization achieve its mission and vision. So one way that has become common practice to gauge your progress for your security program is to do some sort of maturity comparison. Now, on the left-hand side here, we've broken this up in this example into the 5 different functions of the NIST cybersecurity framework, but we've also got a number of elements in this chart here that every single security leader, every single executive, every board member at some point wants to know. Where are you today? What's your current state? Where do you want to get to in the future? What's your target state? And oh, by the way, how do you compare with others in the industry? In this example, that is the yellow line in the middle of this chart. Now, you can't just make up this chart like I made this one up. A lot of research, a lot of information gathering goes into this in terms of accurately conveying your organization and your team's current state. So this is another tool that you want to have in your tool belt, in your arsenal, in your slide deck, that you can show you can show senior leadership why your program is where it is and what your plan is for the program overall. Now, this brings us to strategic communications. You know your mission, you know your vision, you've laid out the corresponding plan. Well, it turns out that you need to communicate about your plan over and over and over again. It turns out that if your team doesn't know your plan or doesn't understand it, then you don't have one because you can't implement it. John Kotter, in his book, Leading Change, lays out a process for, well, driving large change initiatives like your security program. One of the things he says is that, hey, you can't just communicate about your strategic plan in your monthly all hands meetings, in your quarterly all hands meetings, in your weekly team meetings. It might feel like a lot, but if you add those up, that might be, maybe hundreds of different interactions of mentioning elements in your strategic plan. He says this, he gives a suggestion. What you should do instead is, hey, go ahead and identify the top people in your organization, the managers, the directors, the leaders, the team leads, the technical experts, and ask them to do one simple thing. Every single day, just talk about your strategic program, your strategic plan 5 times. And let's say that there are 10 people who you've asked to do this. And it's not anything big. It's something simple like, hey, I'm thinking about this new project, and have your people ask back, oh, how does that relate to our strategic plan? Oh, where can we find that item in our strategic plan? And by having these 10 people ask 5 times every day, those simple questions, well, if you multiply that out, 10 times 5 is 50, 50 times 365 days a year, right? That is a lot more than the 100 times you might normally talk about your plan within the organization. And this is one way that you can improve your strategic communications. Now, this brings us to this concept of leading change. B.J. Fogg at Stanford came up with this model, the Fogg behavior model. And he says, if you want to change behaviors, if you want to get people to do new things in any area, well, in our case, from a security perspective, you've got to think about, well, motivation, ability, and prompts. Now, it's not that the people in our organizations, it's not that they don't want to be secure. It's just they don't know necessarily or have the ability how to do it. So let's take an example. Maybe we tell people, hey, don't send unencrypted data in email. Make sure that you send your email encrypted. Well, people's motivation to do that might be high because, well, they don't want to cause a data breach. They don't want to cause a data issue, but their ability might be low if we don't give them the appropriate tools to do that. If we only have them send encrypted email using a more complex system, perhaps like PGP, well, because their ability is low, even though their motivation is high, they fall well under what B.J. Fogg calls this action line. So instead, we've got to increase their ability by doing things like providing them easy send secure button within the email client. And that increases their ability, coupled with their motivation. It's going to move them closer to that action line. But people are busy. People still might forget. This is where the prompts actually come in. Just like you get a warning that says, do you really want to send that email without a corresponding subject line? You can prompt them by asking, hey, things like, do you want to send this email securely instead? So you want to make it easy for people by combining, right? Thinking about both motivation, ability, and, of course, your various prompts. All right. Now, this brings us to transforming yourself. While developing your team and your program, you need to work on also transforming yourself by understanding, well, your own motivations, and learning to apply these lessons to your team members. So what can you do in this area? First, we've got coaching, mentoring, and sponsorship. How can you help others and transform yourself at the same time? It turns out that both asking for and providing help in the form of coaching, mentoring, and sponsorship accomplishes both. Now, it was Zig Ziglar that said, hey, you can get anything you want in life if you help enough other people get what they want as well. And this is why we're going to talk a little bit here about coaching, mentoring, and sponsorship. So first, from a coaching perspective here, we've got this simple model here, another 4-quadrant 2x2 grid here that's nicely shaped in the form of a circle. We've got, well, when you are coaching somebody, and maybe when you're even thinking about coaching yourself, you've got to ask these questions, right? First, the hardest one to ask is, what is the goal? What are you trying to accomplish? How are you going to know when that's done, right? When I had my first big executive job, the organization that I was at would give all new executives in that organization an executive coach. Now, a coach is somebody, by definition, kind of like a sports coach that helps, right, is trying to help you, your kids, develop certain skills. shoot the ball better, swing the bat better, whatever it might be, right? Improve certain your times in certain events. And so you've got to have some goals in place. And this executive coach helped me set some goals about, hey, how am I going to go ahead and build relationships within the organization? Then you've got to ask, well, what is your current state, the current reality? What options, what are some ways that you can achieve that overall goal based on your current state, based on your current reality? And then what the coach, you as the coach should do is to, well, help them think through what option works best, what support they actually need. But notice, you, the coach, are not prescribing, are not defining what they should do. You're helping, right, the person that you're coaching go through this model so that they can come to a decision on their own. Now, we also have mentoring here. Mentoring is a little bit different from coaching, right? Coaching, remember, to build a specific skill. Mentoring here, on the other hand, is a lot of times actually about a two-way relationship. Over the years, I've been lucky enough, fortunate enough to have some people ask if I could be their mentor. And I don't always jump to saying yes, right? I always think, okay, well, can I actually help this person? And if I try to help this person, do I think that they're going to act? Are they going to actually take the advice and turn it into action? But then I also think to myself, oh, okay, well, not only can I help this person, but hey, what can I learn? Can I learn something from this relationship as well? So it's also about mentoring somebody, but also, right, being mentored yourself in some way. And there's been some relationships over the years where that it started as a mentorship, and now it's turned into more of a peer and a friend relationship. So it could be highly fulfilling. Now, moving on to sponsorship here, Marissa Mayer, former CEO at Yahoo, said, hey, work for someone who believes in you, because when they believe in you, they will invest in you. And so this gets us to sponsorship. This is different from coaching, building a specific skill, mentorship, supporting another person, learning from each other. A workplace sponsor is somebody that is able to guide and influence your career. This means that typically they're in a more senior position. It could be your manager, it could be your director, it could be your VP. And they, because they've seen you do amazing work, take an interest in advancing your career because you've got a lot of potential. And honestly, they want to sponsor you because they know that you're going to do amazing work. And by extension, they know that you're going to make them look good. So a lot of times that if you want to advance even further in your career, this is finding a sponsor. Getting a sponsor is really necessary to advance into a lot of those executive and C-level positions in terms of jumpstarting your career overall. Now, this brings us to this concept of the pie: performance, image, and exposure. Now, there's a gentleman by the name of Harvey J. Coleman. He used to be an executive at IBM, and he was rising up through the ranks. At some point, he hit a ceiling, though, and he found he couldn't advance any further. And in frustration, he left IBM and went into consulting. And it wasn't until some time later he realized, one of the reasons that I wasn't able to advance is because I didn't correctly think about the pie. Now, when you are advancing in your career, going for more senior positions and perhaps helping others on your team go for more senior positions, well, it's not just about performance, right? To advance in your career, Harvey J. Coleman says performance is only 10% of your ability to advance in your career once you reach that point, right? Now, when I first started out as an engineer, as a developer, building systems and applications, typing all day at my keyboard, close to 100% of my job success was tied to my performance. How well could I do that job? But as you progress in your career, being great at your job, that's just table stakes, right? It's just, hey, you've got to perform to even just get an invitation to the party. That's what we're talking about here. Then Harvey J. Coleman also says, 30% of your ability to advance in your career is image. How do people perceive you? But check this out. 60%, a full 60% is making sure that you have the right relationships, managing your exposure so the right people will actually know you, right? Related to what we were just talking about from a sponsorship perspective. Now, this brings us to the 6 C's of career management. My friend and mentor, Steve Katz, who's widely regarded as the world's first CISO, he's told me about this model, this little tool here to think about, hey, helping others in their career or even managing your career as well, that he calls the 6 C's. Number 1, challenge. Are you trying to take this new opportunity because it's something you haven't done before, a new challenge that you want to undertake? Number 2, chemistry. Are you going to be able to work well with your leadership team, with your peers, and with your team members, right? What does that actually look like in terms of the team dynamic? And do they have a commitment to you, or are you really brought in just to be the fall person, right, for that particular event? Right. So the first three that are listed here are really more of the motivational factors: challenge, chemistry, commitment. And then you can see that the bottom three, compensation, contract, right, and commute, right, these are more of your hygiene factors. And I will say that it's not, they don't have to stay in this order, right? When I first had kids, for example, right, the commute was actually the top of my list for a brief period of time. Because, with new kids, with young babies, you want to be home, and, I didn't want to be traveling so much anymore. So that rose to the top. But as circumstances change, right, you might reorder some of these. So you want to recognize when this order changes for you, and keep your finger on the pulse of when this order changes for your team members as well, in terms of prioritization and helping them, right, get what they want in their jobs, in their careers, and in their lives. So kind of in summary here, leading transformation, right? Leadership isn't just about a title. It's about getting people ready to fill your shoes, building something sustainable, and finding happiness and joy in these various activities, the tools, the items that we've talked about so far today. Now, in terms of your personal action plan, well, what can you do? Well, within a week here in this first column, some suggestions when you go back to work. Take a little bit of time to try to start to understand your team members' goals. What are their motivations, right? What do they actually want? And then as you're building out your program, identify your key business partners. Think about building relationships with them, but also for yourself, make sure that you define your corresponding career goals. Within 3 months, right, make sure you create an employee engagement plan based on what you've learned about your team members. And you might already know a lot of this, but take some time to explicitly write it down and work with them to create this engagement plan of what they actually want. Develop the vision, the mission for your security team, your security program overall. And if you don't already, try to find somebody to mentor, because remember, this is a two-way street of helping somebody, learning from somebody as well. And then longer term, within 6 months, and try to incorporate that radical feedback that we were talking about. And I put this with a longer time horizon, because depending, if you're already doing some of this, then great. But some people might find this hard to incorporate this radical feedback and need to build up to it. Also, for your program overall, create your strategic plan and work towards finding a sponsor for yourself. Depending where you want to go in your career, depending on your career goals, well, that's going to define, well, what type of sponsor you might want to identify. All right. So this brings us to the end of the session. We're going to go ahead and be able to answer some questions here as well. If you have any questions, want to stay in touch, want to share your journey about where you are in terms of some of these different activities that we've talked about, please feel free to reach out to me at any time. Now, just remember, whether you're a current CISO, someone looking for a more senior leadership position, you can use the items that we talked about in this CISO Leadership Action Plan to transform your team, transform your program, and ultimately transform yourself. Thank you all very much.